which if you're new to us, when we like to talk Critical Role, we always start with a recap to get everybody back on the same page and, all the gears whirring at maximum efficiency before we dive into theory crafting and discussion mode. And we actually cut that recap out of the podcast and host it separately on YouTube for your convenience. So if you happen to find yourself on that recap video, thanks for checking us out. But if you're interested to hear the full discussion, it'll be linked down below. But yeah, without much more delay, if you would like to take us off, my friend.
Yeah, so this was episode 57 of Campaign 3, The Sorrow of Molaesmyr. What a great title. And this episode picks up with the party essentially creeping through the city of Molaesmyr. They just saw this eyeless freak of a spider stag and are spooked. They're now navigating through the city under Pass Without a Trace, trying essentially to make it to the Guild Hollow Tower, and figure out what's going on. On the way, they see a number of things, one of which are these fissures that have sort of split open the ground of the town with this, similar to what they saw on the raft entering the area of Molaesmyr, this creeping miasma that seeps out of these large fissures. And these fissures only become bigger as they head towards the center of the city. They are trying to figure out really where to go. We do have a moment where FCG naturally says, hey, let's ask the Changebringer. And instead of just asking, actually cast Divination. And they seem to be directed by either a fog or a whipping wind that sort of guides them down a certain path. And they eventually make their way to this broken down stable that has the corpse of a horse that has sort of stretched and elongated into the wall of this building. And this is actually a common theme where not only the place is littered with corpses, but even the corpses themselves have begun to mutate and change and become part even of the environment as these branches and vines and unnatural sort of landscape seems to have taken a life of its own. So with the dead stretched horse, there's a moment where Frida actually casts Decompose on the horse, and it basically becomes brittle and falls away into ash. And it's around this point that Imogen's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this in case this is like a Last of Us, it's all connected, like kind of thing. And if she's like, all right, fine, that's fine. They also, as they're sort of navigating through this area, sorry, I'm just checking my notes. They eventually make their way to these sort of moments in time of these spirits that, as they're kind of traveling through the town, these spirits are there for a moment and then they sort of fade away, and in some cases later in the episode even reach out to them to try to touch them. There's actually a moment where they kind of come to this larger courtyard where they find themselves surrounded by a number of spirits. Deanna's actually going to use her channel divinity to cast Lens Flare, and actually I think it was FCG also. Didn't he do was it Deanna's channel divinity or was it FCG's that basically, it's not the turn undead, but basically like destroy undead?
I think it was Abria, because she said like J.J. Abrams Lens Flare or something like that.
Yeah. So it's basically the cleric's turn undead ability, but at a certain level, everything under CR1 gets just totally destroyed. And in fact, most of the spirits do get absolutely annihilated by this, except for 5 of them, and Matt has them go to combat. So typically what we do with combat, we just cover the high notes of it. The main mechanic of these creatures is they are going to try to possess the players. One of them is immediately going to try to possess Chetney and is successful. And Travis begins to do this running joke of now being basically now being an influencer, like a social media influencer.
Yeah.
It's like this really hilarious bit that he keeps coming back to in this whole combat scene. And fortunately, everyone else is successful in basically staving this off. Now, the spirits actually aren't that powerful, and so they don't really have much of an issue in fighting against them. We do have a moment where FCG recognizes that they and Frida are probably trusted companions, and so does Bonded Blessing, which is what the mechanic of their subdomain that gives them an extra D6 to their trusted companion. The Deanna is actually going to use their wasn't like diamond dust or whatever the regent was to cast I think it's a greater restoration to cleanse the possession off of Chetney, which by the way I think might be the last of that regent that she has. I'm not sure, but anyway, all to say, casts it, gets it off of him. And for the most part, there's not a lot that happens in the rest of this combat other than Chetney does get the "how do you want to do this?" and says like "no cap, I'm the goat" or whatever, and Matt's like, "You kill it, that's it, that's all you get." Like, we're not indulging on this anymore. They're immediately aware of how much sound this combat must have caused, and they noticed this large gargantuan tower that they've been heading towards the center of the city. There is a shadowy winged creature that leaves the tower and begins flying away. There's perception checks from FCG and I think maybe Ashley Johnson's character Fern. They roll extremely well, and basically Matt describes what we've seen so far: another creature of horror that the party kind of starts calling it a pterodactyl, but it's a taloned, hulking, bird-like creature that lacks a head. It has no head, just these hulking shoulders that are crested by basically nothing. We find out later there is a glowing purple eye on the cusp of where that head should be. But all that to say, the creature flies away. And the party also in this moment realizes that this large, massive tower that's at least 10 stories tall is not the Guild Hollow Tower. This is actually some central tower. And they're like, why the heck are we heading this way? What are we doing here? We don't want to go this way. So there is a nearby tower that Frida ends up stepping into because they want to get a better perspective on the landscape. So all that to say, they make their way into this building. There is, like we mentioned with the horse earlier, there's tapestries. There is the white tree on the tapestry that they noticed back in Uthadern, I think like on like their crest or like on a coin or something. Basically the same sigil that they've seen in Uthadern. And then there's also this tree in the center of the room that seems to stretch and have a face on it. And as Frida kind of moves through the tower, the face sort of kind of creeps and looks at them, in just a horrific way. Frida basically makes their way to the top of this tower, looks out into the distance, and they do spot the Guild Hollow Tower on the northwestern side of the building, this sort of slanted, almost falling building about half a mile away, and basically directs them where to go. Doesn't see the stag and does actually see the shadowy flying creature seemingly carrying something limp before going back into that central tower at the middle of the city. Did I miss anything, or are we good to go to your section after the break?
Oh yeah, I think you got it.
Okay. So we go to break, and then do you want to take it from there?
Yes, sir. So we pick back up with everyone heading toward the Guild Hollow Tower while Frida is keeping watch from this perch that they found. FCG is going to lead the way and actually rolls a natural 1. So basically immediately steps into this crack and this
one of the fissures.
Yeah, one of the fissures, and the spew of miasma comes out, basically covering everyone except Frida, who's not there. So everybody's got to make a Constitution save. And everyone does save except FCG, who has their max HP reduced by 5 from this. So Imogen is like, I'm taking over leading from now. So she starts leading them and rolls much higher. I think she got a 21, and they are on their way. They realize that the telepathic link that they have casted in order to stay stealthy and quiet while they're communicating is about to fade. So they warn Frida that this communication is about to falter and say, "All right, we're basically like halfway there. Just come meet up with us now." And Frida says, "I'm gonna wait until you've made it a little bit further." And then checks again to see where those big beasts are, the stag and the bird. I don't believe Frida can see the stag, but the bird is still, has successfully hunted something and is still just dealing with that. So it's not an issue at the moment.
Right.
And so then the communication fades, and Frida shortly after begins climbing down and is going to start making their way toward the rest of the party. However, Christian rolls a nat 1 on his stealth check and causes basically this loud disturbance. And because of this, there's suddenly this large chorus of howls that are heard from the distance and basically start to quickly approach. The rest of the party can hear the howls from where they are as well, and so they know something's up. And they're kind of in a dilemma. Should they go to the tower? Should they run back and try to help Frida? And the party's kind of split on their immediate reaction here. We have Chetney and FCG kind of immediately darting toward Frida. Fern is like, we should go to the tower. And so Imogen casts, I forget the name of the spell, but it's like this lightning storm, 300 feet in a random direction, essentially, trying to cause a distraction for these wolves. So she does that. Then Fern and Deanna decide we're going to the tower. And Imogen follows them after she casts the spell. But meanwhile, FCG and Chetney had darted off. So once that spell happens, the howling and the wolves seem to change directions and start heading toward that. And because of this, they are now going to intersect with Chetney and FCG. So they immediately hide, and FCG casts stone shape or stone wall in order to kind of camouflage by a nearby rock. And from their vantage point, they can see what is causing these howls. And there is yet another Dark Souls boss that Matt has created.
That's a perfect way to describe it, by the way.
That's totally what I thought
That
of.
is exactly my same thought. Sorry, we'll talk about it more. Continue.
And this is, we find out, the Wolf King that we have been hearing about. And it's these 5 massive dire wolf heads with like elongated torsos, but they're all connected to one central body, one hindquarters, and they're moving as a unified entity, kind of like a hydra, but with wolves.
Mhm.
So Frida, who has been making their way to the party, makes it all the way to the tower where the girls already are, and so the whole group is now just waiting on FCG and Chet. Imogen decides to try sending another message, hoping maybe it'll work over the shorter distance. And Matt has Laura roll a D100 like he has previously when they've been trying this type of magic, and she rolls an 89, and the message successfully makes its way through. And she just asks, "Hey, we're all at the tower. Where are you guys?" So FCG, gets the message, and they double back to the tower, make it safely. And once again, like Blake mentioned, this tower is kind of like lopsided or sagging, and these like trees that in this corrupted forest that are everywhere are partially kind of holding it up
Mhm.
almost.
Yeah.
So because of this, there's not like a let's just go into the entrance of the tower. They have to actually like climb up and find their way in. And so they're climbing up to this kind of like middle portion of the tower. And Deanna has cast a Guardian of Faith kind of at the bottom of where they were climbing just to protect them. And the Wolf King has made his way to them during this time. And they are a decent ways up, and the Wolf King can't really climb. So they're not really in any harm. And the Guardian of Faith that Deanna casted is attacking the Wolf King periodically. And since it can't climb, it basically just gives up and walks away. So the party, now having made it into the interior of the tower, begin to climb up the tower. And inside, it's of course ruined. It's been looted. Everything is disheveled. One, because of the age and the looting, but also because the tower is leaning again. Um, they are inspecting as they go, and Fern rolls an absurdly high I believe, perception check or something, and she
31 or something
yeah,
stupid.
and she basically gets the insight that this indeed was Ludinus's tower. He once lived here, or at least used this place. Um, and as they're going, one thing I wanted to note is that Frida is like dumping oil out, saying that, when we're leaving here, like I'm lighting this place up. So in each floor, in each little space, they're kind of dousing certain
Mhm.
areas with the oil. So again, they're making their way up, and they're coming up a staircase, and they encounter this corpse skeleton that has seemingly died because of a trap that is on the staircase. So they, do their due diligence and find this glyph that they then successfully deactivate before moving forward. And they arrive at what is seemingly the top floor of this tower. And they're doing more investigating. And Chetney comes across these notes that are strewn about up here. And again, these trees and these woods and branches have like come through, overgrown all of this. So there's like old ancient notes like behind tree trunks, just the scraps of what was left here after all the looters. And Chetney takes a closer look at one of these and has Deanna help him. And from what they can salvage, these notes ask tons of questions. They're like annotations on research, talking about the patterns of arcana across cultures and times and different Exandrian dates and the celestial effects of those dates and recurring events. And specifically, there are also names of specialists to reach out
Mhm.
to, such
Yep.
as Vatora, Vishtaron, and Laren.
That's right.
Big name drop there. So they're collecting what papers they can, and there also seem to be these pages torn from a religious text, and there are circles around different things and notes that say like, this is religious propaganda and this is contradictory. And there's proof that there is no real truth or plan to what the gods present. And it seems like this is all preparing, like, it's almost if somebody's preparing to give a TED talk, I think is what Matt says, or
Yeah.
something like a
Right.
speech that was being
Right.
prepared.
Yeah.
And finally, there are notes with this heavy, heavy emphasis on the Matron of Ravens, saying, "What is her
Yes.
name?" Yeah, I have to find her name.
Oh my gosh.
We'll be diving into that.
Oh my gosh.
But so Chetney, in finding these notes, is like, well, let me see if there's any other like clues I can pick up by seeing, like, if somebody wrote on the wall, maybe there's an etching of the writing still beneath it that we could decipher. And so he makes this investigation check and doesn't find any new notes or anything. But what he does find is this weird circular space on one of the walls in this room where like the dust is landing on it differently. So like there's clearly like something there, either hidden or magical or something. So they begin to investigate it, and Deanna casts light on her staff to get near it. And when she does, the light on the staff kind of gets sucked into it, essentially. Almost as if like the spell slot was consumed by whatever this is. So the group is then debating on like, okay, what other spells could we like cast into this thing if that's like the key to opening it, or whatever. They don't really know what it is, but that's what they're trying to figure out. So while they're talking about that, um, Frida, Christian rather, asks Matt like, "Hey, does any of those names you were just talking about from those notes, do they ring any bells? Because like there's something familiar about this place." So Matt has, Frida make a history check, I think, and rolls poorly. So Matt
Yeah.
describes that it's like a memory that just under the surface you can't really get anything out of. So Imogen is like, "Hey, you know, FCG and I can dive into people's minds and help them remember things like we've done it
Mhm.
before. Like, would you be okay with that?" And Frida is, but now they're like, is this the time to do it right now? And they're still trying to figure out this circle thing on the wall. So while they're debating all that, Chetney looks up at the ceiling and notices all these overgrown branches and stuff, and is like, well, let me climb up there and see if there's anything more to discover up top. And as he does, he's kind of tearing through the branches, and he comes across something like soft, something that is not like the other branches. And he pulls his hand down, and it's like covered in blood. So he's like, I'm gonna get down, and
Yeah.
he starts climbing down, and there's this huge thud, and then another, and then Matt describes yet another Dark Souls boss, honestly, of this like bestial but like skinless, like
Yeah.
fresh creature, with all these like maws begin to emerge from the mess of the branches above. and he says like its form is yet undecided as it's being inspired like by the party and by like the various people it's seen come through here, and as it's crawling forth, that's where the episode ends. um which again, episode 57 of campaign 3. And if you are just watching the recap video and want to hear our full discussion on it, it will be linked down below.